In a quiet neighborhood, a single gunshot shattered the peace, exposing a chilling truth of prejudice and power. This is no ordinary story. It's a gut-wrenching tale of injustice that will leave you speechless. One mother's love for her roses turned into a tragedy that shook a city and ignited a fight for justice. Will you stand with the truth? Watch to uncover the raw, unfiltered reality. Drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. Your voice matters. Join the conversation, share your thoughts, and let's uncover the impact of this story together. Don't miss this. Stay until the end. The voice of Daniel Thompson broke out quickly and rudely, saying, "Hey, old woman, hold still. What the hell are you doing by being here at this hour?" Margaret looked up at her kind with a dubious expression, shattering the serene atmosphere of the evening. When she looked over, her eyes narrowed in the direction of the voice, and she was a little surprised to find a police officer approaching her, within her response was, "Good evening, officer. What's the matter?" "I'm just tending to these roses." She responded with a hostile attitude. Thompson glared at her with a sneer, despite the fact that she was feeling a little puzzled when caring the roses. With a look of disdain, he halted a few steps away, his eyes sweeping over the head of the elderly woman, and toe resting thoughtfully on her dark complexion and basic attire. "You don't portray the kind of person who would do something like that. If you live in this affluent neighborhood, you must be a maid who slips out of the house to do something when her boss is gone." Margaret wore a severe frown due to the fact that the racist slur was unapologetically used. To be offended, she had been a resident of this place for a number of months with her kid, and despite the fact that she might not have dressed in the silks of the inn comparison to the other women in the neighborhood, she did not deserve to be treated in such a manner. "Officer, I am not a maid. This is the residence of my son, James Carter, and I reside with him currently. I am entitled to be in this location, and your son, James Carter Thompson, has reiterated the name." He moved closer to me, his tone becoming more arrogant, and he started acting suspiciously here at Willow Creek Estates. "Don't make this up. Please show me your identification so that I can determine whether you are indeed someone's mother or whether you are just a fake vagabond. I was in the area, my very own yard, and I was no longer carrying my wallet or any form of identification with me." Margaret responded, her voice beginning to become more resolute. "Little at the unfair treatment, and I have no duty to reveal you my papers when I haven't done anything wrong. Tell me what you think. What credible justification could you possibly have for interrupting me and asking me such illogical questions?" Margaret's ability to remain calm. Thompson's fury was already building up, but the fact that she was clear-headed and that her reasoning was called into question added gasoline to the fire. Who believed that individuals of color made them feel anxious and frightened, particularly when they appeared intellectual or stood up for what they believed in? Constitutional rights. He felt that his authority as a police officer was being questioned by an elderly black woman. "Because I have my doubts about you." With his face flushed and his right hand already firmly grasping the butt of his revolver, Thompson yelled out, "You are being defiant, and you are hiding here." As he approached Margaret, he noticed that she reflexively took a step back, possibly with her hand lifted slightly to shelter herself from the perceived threat. The action was taken by him to Thompson while he was in a state of mental strain and blind prejudice. The phrase "freeze, drop your weapon" is perceived as a threat. He yelled in an insane manner. Margaret froze despite the fact that it was obvious that she was holding nothing more than a pair of pruning shears in her hand. She opened her mouth to explain, not knowing what to do because she was thoroughly perplexed by the officer's odd command and confrontational demeanor. To argue that she was not armed, but that she had lost the opportunity to do so in a moment of reality, officers' insanity brought on by unwarranted fear, racial prejudice, and unrestrained wrath. The sound of a single gunshot was heard as Daniel Thompson removed his Glock pistol from its holster. A loud and dry sound burst out, breaking apart the peace and calm of Willow Creek Estates, and the bullet was fired. Margaret Carter was struck in the chest, and her eyes widened in shock and amazement as she was shocked. After taking a few steps backward, she sank upon the lovely green lawn that was located just next to the crimson rose bushes that she had bought. A stain appeared on her chest as blood began to seep out of the wound that had been so meticulously attended to. Officer Thompson, who was wearing a purple sweater, remained there for a time, completely frozen, as he looked at the lifeless body of the elderly woman, and he was holding a burning revolver in his palm, and he was beginning to feel a sense of terror. What had he done? As I looked about, I noticed that several of the windows of surrounding houses were open, and I could see a few persons looking out. At that moment, screaming started to reverberate through the air. "Oh my God, someone has been shot! Call 911!" The moment Thompson realized that he needed to take action, he hurriedly reinserted the revolver into its holster. The individual then removed his walkie-talkie from its holster and stammered a report to the center, stating that "this is car 54 there. I was present when there was a shooting at the address, and the subject is acting in a menacing manner." After being compelled to shoot in self-defense, he proceeded to fabricate a story in order to cover up his actions. He requested an ambulance and was given prompt support. Although it was a dreadful crime, the truth cannot be concealed for all time. The deadly gunshot was not only resulted in the death of a kind and innocent mother, but it was also about to spark a legal and political earthquake that shook the entire world. The entirety of the city, due to the fact that the victim was not merely a typical elderly black woman, she was the mother of federal prosecutor James Carter, also known as the Whale of the Court. Margaret Carter. The tranquility of Willow Creek Estates was abruptly disrupted by the sound of police and ambulance sirens within a matter of minutes on the narrow roadway. There was a significant presence of Maplewood police officers in red and blue uniforms, and yellow tape was used to block off the area in front of James Carter's residence. Paramedics responded to a scene that was both chaotic and sorrowful as lights flashed in the dark hours. After a few minutes of quick thinking, the person ran from the ambulance to the location where Margaret Carter was lying still on the grass. As they examined her, they shook their heads and expressed their regret that she had been shot and died at the site. She suffered major damage to her heart and lungs as a result of a wound to her chest where her body was. There was a heavy presence of security at the crime site, which was temporarily covered with a white sheet while the forensic team awaited their arrival. Detective Robert Harris, a veteran of the Maplewood Police Department, was the one who made the statement. It was the department's major crime unit that was tasked with conducting the initial investigation that he was responsible for. In a meticulous manner, he requested images of the murder scene from a variety of angles, and he recorded the placement of the rounds of ammunition. Thompson's murder weapon was found close to where he was standing, and preliminary statements were taken when it was confiscated for ballistics verification. Based on the testimony of witnesses, Officer Daniel Thompson removed the shooter from the scene immediately. In accordance with the usual procedure, the scene and placed in isolation in another patrol car. During the time that Detective Harris arrived to collect Thompson's initial statement, the procedure for officer-involved shootings was being followed. Appeared distressed, but he continued to insist that he was acting in self-defense. "I was on patrol and saw," he said on multiple occasions. Thompson stuttering and his voice quivering, "I went up to her and asked for her papers. Her behavior in the yard was showing signs of being suspicious. As she went into her pocket, as if to retrieve a weapon, I noticed something bright, and I had the sensation that my life was about to be taken away from me. I had no choice but to shoot in self-defense because I was in danger and I had no other option." Although he made an effort to make the incident appear more favorable to him, the panic and discrepancies in his statement were not successful. Not lost on the experienced eyes of Detective Harris, while other officers remained in the meantime, neighborhood residents who had seen the incident or heard the gunshots were interrogated, and their statements were almost unanimous in their account of what happened. Margaret was seen by some people to have heard the cop yelling loudly before the rounds were fired. Gardening that does not appear to be unsafe or threatening in any way to one of an adjacent neighbors claimed that she was just holding a pair of little pruning shears, which were definitely not a weapon. These stories plainly show that she was not armed. Data from Thompson's body cam was promptly analyzed, which contradicted Thompson's account of self-defense. Most crucially, the data was instantly confiscated and sealed. Detective Harris was certain that this video would be the most significant and objective evidence to assist in the investigation. Explain the reality, he requested that the technical department prioritize the processing of the request, and the next step in the inquiry was to identify the victim. which was accomplished by evaluating these data, and inform her nearest of kin police were dispatched inside the enormous mansion to investigate the house. Margaret's identification was discovered during the search for the elderly woman's identification in the guest bedroom located on the first level. An old driver's license, a social security card, and a wallet that included a number of other items. She was identified as Margaret Carter by the name that was written on the papers and various family photographs. The emergency contact information for her son was located in either her phone book or her notebook. One of the details that is provided is information about James Carter, which includes his residence and phone number. The office address that was recorded next to James Carter's name with the United States Attorney's Office was what drew the attention of the detective. The federal prosecutor was present, and Office Detective Harris could not help but scowl at this information. There was a coincidence here. He chose to make the challenging call himself, and he dialed the number first. The office number that was written down in the notepad was called, and after a few rings, a male voice that was deep, professional, and confident came on. Attorney's office. Carter is speaking on the other end of the line. How may I be of assistance to you? With a quick glance in the direction of Attorney Carter, Detective Harris's heart skipped a beat. According to the papers, the victim's name is Margaret Carter, which is the same as Carter's last name. It was impossible for him to maintain his composure even when he cleared his throat. Excuse me. I apologize for interfering with you, but I would want to inquire one more. Am I speaking to the federal attorney, James Carter? In a cautious manner, yes. This is James Carter. What's up? The voice of the investigator, James Carter, maintained his customary level of professionalism, although there was a trace of surprise and uncertainty in his voice when I overheard the person on the other end of the call introducing themselves as a detective. The Detective Harris took a long breath and carefully selected his remarks. This was Detective Harris. According to Attorney Carter, this is arguably the most challenging call he has ever come across in his entire tenure as an investigator. It is with much reluctance that I must bring forth Detective Robert Harris of the Maplewood Police Department. He paused, trying to find the appropriate words, and then he told you some very, very sad news. There was my house, James Carter's, was the location of the shooting that took place only a few seconds ago at your residence in Willow Creek Estates. A tight and frantic voice said, "Is anyone hurt? Is my mother home?" My mother was not at home. Sir, the victim of the gunshot was an individual, and Detective Harris felt his throat becoming dry. There was an elderly woman named Margaret Carter who did not make it, and he hesitated. I am sorry, sir. Apologies for the entire lack of communication that occurred on the other end of the call. It was a silence that, although it only lasted a few seconds, it felt like a lifetime, and it was more terrible than any scream or cry that Detective Harris could have heard. When James Carter spoke, his voice was filled with agony and horror. He could hear the heavy, rapid breathing that was coming from the other end of the line. My mother, she said, just below a whisper, but still managing to maintain an unbelievable level of control. He stated it once more, as if to reaffirm the fact that Margaret Carter is his biological mother. A horrific reality had just been brought to his attention, and he said, "What the hell is going on?" As a detective, who was responsible for this? Detective Harris experienced a shiver along his spine. The back of his neck, he was aware that this was no longer a typical police shooting. Rather, it had grown into an investigation that has received a lot of attention and involves a cousin of one of the most influential law enforcement authorities in the region. Sir, there is an ongoing investigation into this matter, and it concerns one of our officers. Immediately before Daniel Thompson could finish his sentence, James Carter interrupted him with his voice. My name is Thompson Daniel, and I'll be there in a moment. I'm frigid and filled with pent-up wrath. The news that the victim of the shooting was the mother of U.S. was quickly announced at the moment the call ended. The news of Attorney James Carter quickly went across the Maplewood Police Department, Chief Wilson, on the day that he received the opportunity. According to the report that Detective Harris had, he was aware that his department was on the verge of an extraordinary crisis pressure from the Department of Justice, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the media. In addition, the wrath of the general public would be enormous and may potentially be devastating to Officer Daniel Thompson. When the culprit first became aware of the situation, he was already in detention at the department and was immediately placed under special observation. As soon as he discovered the victim's true identity, his initial pride and defenses completely vanished, and they were replaced with tremendous terror, and this time, he was aware of the dreadful consequences that resulted from racial discrimination and abuse of power, and he knew that he would not repeat the same mistake. Not be able to get away with it soon after learning about the tragic shooting that included the United States Attorney James Carter's, the government investigative apparatus was put into motion at a dizzying speed, and the United States Department of Health and Human Services. An immediate directive was issued by the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C., directing the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, to officially take with regard to the investigation conducted by the Maplewood Police Department. The explanation was crystal clear. The lack of any sign that he truly felt his life was in jeopardy was consistent with his hesitancy. The event took place in such a lightning-fast and definitive manner, demonstrating a total loss of the body cam video becomes a source of control and possibly deliberate desire to employ force. Proof that cannot be refuted that reveals every single lie that Thompson told in his opening statement, testimony and revealing the true nature of his abuse of authority, racial intolerance, and other inappropriate behaviors. In addition to the careless and cruel shooting, the FBI also re-entered all of the incidents. All of the witnesses from the area confirm what was caught on the body cam, and their testimony further supported what was already known. Said Mrs. Margaret was a kind and loving person who never got into a fight with anyone, while at the time of the incident, she was simply gardening in a calm manner. Additionally, they could plainly hear Thompson ranting before the incident. A comprehensive autopsy performed by the federal medical examiner was also performed, and gunshots were heard. The cause of death of Margaret was determined to be a single gunshot wound to the chest that was delivered at close range, resulting in serious damage to her body. A pair of small pruning shears was discovered on her body, but no weapons were discovered on her vital organs. Found close on the ground, and the FBI determined that it was not possible to confuse it with a lethal weapon. In addition, they carried out a further in-depth research on Daniel Thompson's past and job experience, and they found out that despite the fact that Thompson had never been subjected to significant disciplinary action, he had gotten a great deal of feedback from members of the general public. Individuals of color, or other minorities in particular, have complained about his impoliteness, discriminating behavior, and use of force that was not necessary in low-level circumstances. Yet these concerns were frequently ignored or dealt lightly at the time. At the internal level of the Maplewood Police Department, this demonstrated a pattern of behavior that was both frightening and concerning. The collapse of the prior system of oversight, while the inquiry by the federal government continues. Attorney James Carter, who is mourning the loss of his client, is acting with a sense of urgency and ferocity. His mother makes an effort to convince him that he is unable to immediately intervene in the situation. Due to the fact that there is a clear conflict of interest for the inquiry, all of the work that is associated with the case will be handled by his superior. However, due to his position and prestige, colleagues at the Department of Justice and the Office of Special Counsel are unable to compete with him. As the inquiry progressed, James Carter continued to pay close attention to each and every step. Regular and secret conversations with the Attorney General and the special agent in charge of the FBI, Parker, to ensure that at the same time as every component of the case was explained, all of the required resources were recruited. After the administration of justice was carried out in the most stringent manner, he made a single public appearance, which was a brief news conference. A few days after the catastrophe, he read the letter with a grieving expression on his face, but a forceful voice. A brief statement that expresses the profound anguish that his family is experiencing and praises his late father, described his mother as a compassionate and loving woman who had a firm faith in the concept of justice. His faith in the judicial system that he was serving, which demanded an inquiry into the matter that was exhaustive, impartial, and without compromise. The individual who was responsible for the untimely passing of his mother, he stressed that this event, not only was it a terrible event for his family, but it also served as a sad reminder of the senseless brutality committed by police, and it is the specter of racism that continues to plague American society. and his speech is replete of the presence of emotion. In addition to being very calculated and professional, created intense feelings, and Daniel Thompson, on the other hand, was confronted with experienced FBI agents while receiving enormous sympathy and backing from the public. Agents and the proof that could not be refuted from his own body cam had completely concluded that his first defense had been shattered, and he was no longer able to dispute or reject the allegations. He may have panicked, experienced a mental breakdown, or perhaps stubbornly blamed the situation on the fact that he found himself under such intense strain. Regardless of the circumstances, the victim's provocation was infruitless, regardless of his ultimate reaction. The truth about his heinous activities and his nefarious motivations had been brought to light in its entirety by the investigation that the FBI had conducted, accumulated sufficient information to construct the most robust potential indictment in preparation for an anticipated historic trial following a historic event. A thorough investigation conducted by the FBI came to a conclusion with facts that cannot be refuted on the unjustified shooting of Daniel Thompson. A historic and significant decision was made by the United States Attorney's Office in response to the racially motivated homicide of Margaret Carter. The decision to prosecute the former police officer on the most serious accusations and pursue the highest possible sentence was one that shocked everyone. The decision to impose the death sentence as a penalty under the law was not made to be taken lightly. Reflects the very serious nature of the situation, the wrath of the general public, and possibly the victim's exceptional position as the mother of a federal prosecutor. The Department of Justice intended to convey the most forceful statement possible that it is unacceptable for law enforcement agents to kill individuals in a manner that is both harsh and unconstitutional, and they must be punished to the fullest extent possible, to the greatest extent possible in order to guarantee objectivity and prevent any potential. An appointment of a special federal prosecutor has been made by the Department of Justice in response to conflicts of interest concerning James Carter. In this particular case, Ms. Laura Bennett will serve as the prosecution's team leader. Bennett is a seasoned attorney who is well known for her precision and significant experience in handling difficult cases involving mortality and civil rights. When it comes to instances involving penalties, she is granted the authority to decide on the strategy of the prosecution and to present the case in court. It is the most serious allegations that are included in the formal indictment that was brought against Daniel Thompson in the United States District Court. The violation of civil rights in accordance with the law that results in death is a fundamental federal criminal offense that focuses on the intentional breach of Margaret Carter's rights to life security and freedom from excessive. When Thompson used force on her while he was on duty, it ultimately led to her murder. This crime was perpetrated in exceptional circumstances. The death sentence may be applied to the defendant, as well as the use of a lethal weapon, an additional federal charge that is frequently associated with violent crimes that occurs during the commission of a violent crime, involving firearms that may result in further prison sentences, third-party defendant. In accordance with the penal legislation of the state in which the crime was committed, the focus is on murder. With regard to the death of a person without any prior planning, as opposed to first-degree murder, which is characterized by the combination of Daniel Thompson's trial in the federal court, assures him of the best possible conviction, thanks to the combination of federal and state accusations. The courthouse itself became an event that garnered attention from domestic and international media outlets on a national and international scale. Courtrooms were always packed with attendees, including representatives of the cases that were being covered by reporters who were sent to cover the case. An extensive number of social activists, civil rights organizations, relatives of the victims, families of the defendants, and families of the defendants. For the first time ever, the number of public security personnel who were interested in the courthouse was increased to an unprecedented level. Despite the fact that he was not a member of the prosecution team, James Carter was present in court as the victim's son. He sat comfortably in the courtroom. His face was hardened with grief, but his eyes remained steadfast as the events transpired, and his presence was apparent to everyone in the front row of the family. Watching the trial of the person who had murdered his mother was a frightening sight for a prominent federal prosecutor, and it served as a daily reminder of, as a result of the catastrophe and the pressing requirement for justice, the trial ended after several weeks. The delivery of evidence and the intense dispute that took place between the two sides, which was led by the team of prosecutors, led by Laura Bennett, produced a case that was both impressive and fascinating. They started by playing the body cam video of Thompson, which is the most vital and indisputable piece of evidence. Bennett looked at every single second, every single phrase, and every single motion in the video's evidence. Thompson's foolish escalation, his hostile posture, and his insulting behavior are all brought to light. Comments, and finally, his cold, unprovoked shooting. She called in witnesses from a variety of sources, witnesses from the community to testify that Margaret was kind and harmless, as well as to validate what they had seen and heard about him previously. In the afternoon of the tragic event, forensic experts revealed the findings of the autopsy. Social psychologists have confirmed the cause of death and ruled out the possibility that Thompson was acting in self-defense. In addition, criminologists were brought in to investigate implicit racial bias at the police department. In spite of the fact that stress syndrome was present, it was emphasized that these reasons did not excuse the conduct of shooting and killing Mrs. Bennett. A devastating picture was painted of a cherished mother and grandmother who was slain in her own backyard by the exact person who was responsible for her death. She brought attention to the brutality and inhumanity of the crime, as well as the betrayal of the person who was supposed to give her protection. Public confidence, and requested that the jury render a verdict that was impartial and adequate in light of the gravity of the situation. The legal team representing Daniel Thompson is confronted with a challenging task that they cannot ignore. The fact that Thompson was responsible for the death of Margaret, their primary objective is to attempt to decrease reducing the charge of murder to that of manslaughter, or attempting to get rid of the federal civil rights component that could lead to the death of the defendant. Punishment: they attempted to claim that Thompson had acted in a situation of panic and made a mistake of judgment. The risk that is a result of the pressures of work and the complicated security situation in the community. They attempted to concentrate on the fact that Margaret had placed her hand in her pocket, which was an action that prompted suspicion even more than anything else. The video made it abundantly evident that it was nothing more than a normal reflex. Yet, in order to demonstrate regret, they put Thompson on the witness stand. Thompson shed tears and discussed the psychological pressure he was under from his nebulous anxieties. Despite the testimony was difficult to maintain in the face of the probing questions posed by the prosecutor Bennett and the substantial evidence presented by the additionally, they attempted to identify any shortcomings in the initial police or FBI camera footage. An investigation to shake up the case, but it appears that the closing arguments were unsuccessful. In the latter portion of her argument, Prosecutor Bennett made a request for justice for Margaret that was not only emotional but also compelling. Carter and her family, as well as the necessity of conveying to the police force that there is absolutely no tolerance for acts of violence with racist undertones. She pleaded with the jurors to have the bravery to reach a decision that was founded on the facts in their conscience, regardless of how challenging it would be. Perhaps after days of paying close attention to presentations and hours, or even days of attending meetings. 12 members of the federal jury ultimately reached a conclusion after tense deliberation behind closed doors. They returned to the courtroom with grave expressions, where they had made a verdict that was unanimous. The atmosphere in the courtroom was thick. Daniel Thompson stood there, his face pallid, his hands clasped so tightly that you could hear a pin drop. He was so quiet that you could hear a pin drop. James Carter sat in the front row with his eyes closed, waiting for the moment when his knuckles became white. As the jury reached its conclusion regarding the individual who had taken his cherished mother, the foreman of the jury rose up while holding the verdict paper. When he spoke about the accusation of deprivation, his voice was clear and solemn as he held it in his hand. We, the jury, have determined that Daniel is the defendant in the case of civil rights under law causing death. A guilty verdict was reached for Thompson on the charge of using a deadly weapon in the conduct of a crime. On the basis of the crime of violence, the jury has decided that Daniel Thompson is guilty of the charges. Charges of murder in the second degree, we, the jury, have determined that Daniel is the victim of the crime. Daniel Thompson was found guilty of all of the most serious charges, and the verdict indicated that he was guilty. He was so stunned by the hefty charges that he almost passed out if it weren't for his attorney. A resounding chorus of sobs emanated from his family as James Carter opened his eyes for the first time. A tear rolled softly down his powerful face as he realized that justice was on its way after the moment. Daniel Thompson's trial is about to enter its most severe and distinctive phase, which is the sentencing phase once the jury has found him guilty. The former law enforcement officer will be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and the jury will be responsible for making the ultimate decision. With the death sentence, this is a difficult and potentially upsetting legal process that calls for serious consideration. Assessment of aggravating and mitigating elements in accordance with the federal law, which was finally reached after a great deal of time spent carefully. After much consideration, the jury returned to the courtroom with solemn expressions on their faces. They had reached a conclusion that was unanimous. The foreman stood up and read out loud their final recommendation, which we, the jury, were discussing. After taking into account all of the evidence, as well as the aggravating and mitigating considerations, the prosecution unanimously recommends the sentence of, it was decided that the defendant, Daniel Thompson, would be executed, and the verdict was handed down. A courtroom that was holding its breath as Daniel Thompson stood there, his sentence was the death punishment. With his face pale and his legs trembling as if they were about to give way, he was aware of his impending doom. A few days later, during the final formal sentencing hearing, the envelope was sealed by the presiding judge. After taking into account the recommendations of the jury and the statutes of the federal government, the federal judge solemnly read the verdict that he had reached, emphasized the extremely serious nature of the case, the brutality of the crime, the breach of public confidence, and the fact that the public's trust was betrayed. In order to guarantee justice and serve as a deterrent, the requirement of a proportionate sentence. Daniel Thompson, the judge continued, his voice reverberating throughout the courtroom, for the crimes you have committed for the past few years. Under the garb of law, the egregious violation of civil rights and the taking of the life of an innocent citizen are both considered to be a crime. The United States District Court, based on the recommendation of the jury, hereby condemns both of you. He stopped for one more moment, beaten, and then loudly exclaimed, "Death penalty." The sentence of death was handed down. Daniel Thompson was declared to have fallen on the spot, which severely damaged his reputation. James Carter sat in the front row with his eyes closed while his family wailed in agony. Justice had been carried out to the utmost extent possible, but the anguish of losing his mother was still present. Tears were streaming down his cheeks. Thompson, who was devastated, was placed in handcuffs and escorted out of the courthouse by United States Marshals in a gloomy silence. He would begin his sentence, the lengthy and unreliable trip that leads down the tunnel of La Muerte to its highest point. Awaiting the day of his final punishment for his heinous offenses, he is currently at a federal prison with security. Daniel Thompson's sentencing to death for his actions has created a nationwide debate that reflects the complexity and severity of the situation. However, the sensitivity of the death penalty in contemporary America is not only for the family of the victim, but also for the Black community this is a vital and important step for many others who are horrified by police violence and bigotry. It is a form of justice that is proportionate to the offense that was committed, and it affirms that no one, not even the law enforcement officers, should be able to take the lives of other people without due process of law. There is a possibility that James Carter made a final remark to the court after the conclusion of the trial. Through the media, he conveyed his profound sadness for the death of his family, while also confirming that his confidence in the judicial system and the expectation that this severe punishment would serve as a powerful warning that would contribute to it is possible that he may advocate for significant reforms in law enforcement in order to forestall the occurrence of disasters of a similar nature in the future. He would devote the rest of his professional and personal life to constantly pushing for reforms in the criminal justice system, fighting against racism, and the case of Daniel Thompson, which focuses on the protection of civil rights for all people, has become a case study at law schools and police colleges all around the world. A sobering reminder of the dreadful effects that can result from the exploitation of bias in the country. Because of their authority and inability to exercise control, the Maplewood Police Department and many other, The pressure that other law enforcement organizations are under to reform, modify, and strengthen their organizational culture is severe. The horrible tragedy that occurred at Willow Creek will involve oversight and the rebuilding of community confidence, permanently leave an everlasting mark on the history of the city, and serve as a wake-up call for an organization. If you are interested in this, I would want to thank the entire nation for taking the time to listen to this story. If you want to ensure that you don't miss out on the next meaningful stories, please click the like button and subscribe to the channel that I have created. We are going to have another tale that is significant for you.